Every attribute on Oleg's new status screen began at 1, leaving him weaker than the average village teenager. He could barely lift a stool, outrun a turtle, or move the enormous sword waiting inside his ruined castle. The sarcastic system mocked every pathetic number. But Oleg saw something far more valuable than humiliation. Whenever training pushed an attribute across its threshold, his exhaustion vanished and his body immediately adapted. That meant suffering was not a warning to stop. It was the fastest road toward becoming completely unstoppable. Oleg began with trembling push-ups, clumsy squats, hallway sprints, and rocks that repeatedly crushed his unfortunate toes. Every failure added progress, every collapse reset his stamina, and every painful day made the next workout harder. When ordinary exercises stopped working, he carried boulders, dragged trees, and used his giant sword as training weight. His strength climbed until one casual punch cracked stone pillars and sent fractures through the castle walls. His speed rose until horses looked slow, while his stamina allowed him to train for days without sleeping. Even crafting improved because the system counted polishing armor, repairing roofs, carving wood, and rebuilding shattered furniture. The abandoned fortress slowly became both his home and the most ridiculous private training gym in the continent. Oleg was no chosen prince surrounded by servants. He was one stubborn reincarnator, one rude system, and endless ruins. Then a shadow demon bat crashed through his window and proved raw numbers still meant nothing without real combat. After surviving venom, claws, and a desperate sword strike, Oleg doubled his training instead of celebrating the victory. Months later, every movement carried siege-level force, and castle walls could break beneath a single controlled punch. Yet an ancient message revealed that House Herman's bloodline made him the natural enemy of demons hiding beyond the seals. To protect his inherited castle, Oleg finally left the forest and followed demonic energy toward the city of Malaga. On that road, he rescued the noblewoman Fanny Rodney and accidentally stepped into a conspiracy threatening an entire kingdom. The weakest man with every stat at 1 was about to discover what non-stop training had truly turned him into. Oleg opened his status panel and immediately regretted it. Agility was 1, strength was 1, and every category included a cruel system insult. He tried lifting the giant sword, but it refused to move even a millimeter. The system calmly blamed his pathetic strength. Oleg completed 5 push-ups before collapsing like a deflated balloon, his arms shaking through a personal earthquake. But when stamina hit 2, boom, all fatigue vanished instantly, like someone hit the reset button on his entire body. He performed squats until his legs failed and dropped him onto both knees. Then Oleg hopped around the castle like a cursed pogo stick for 5 minutes. Oleg ran into a wall at full speed because Oleg could not break. After all that beautiful suffering, his stats looked slightly less embarrassing. Strength 3, can finally move a small stool. Agility 2, the turtle agrees to race you now. Then Oleg noticed his armor was covered in mud from all his spectacular falls. So Oleg grabbed a rag and started cleaning it. Any repetitive hand motion increases crafting, including but not limited to polishing armor, peeling potatoes, knitting sweaters. He looked like a fully armored madman polishing his chest plate in a ruined castle, while giggling at every crafting point. The library nearly defeated him with centuries of dust, although its shelves contained priceless books about history, magic, and the surrounding continent. Oleg grabbed a magic textbook, opened it, and a clump of spiderweb fell out onto his hand. Oleg almost threw the book into orbit. Oleg sat down to read it properly. His weight cracked the ancient book cleanly in half. So Oleg placed both pieces down with guilty care, literally growling so loud it echoed through the library like some kind of demon was trapped in there. You mean Oleg would have to grind all over again? Oleg had been reading like a maniac for days. Surrounded by ancient books, he had scattered like a very nerdy tornado. The sunlight coming through the dusty stained glass windows made all the floating dust sparkle like glitter, magical glitter that made him sneeze every 30 seconds. The continent of Alhaciris, a classic swords and sorcery world with 3 major powers, the human Nistad Empire, the beastman Agula's kingdom, and get this, a dragon homeland called Grange Mouth, where dragons literally run a mercenary business. The system gave him a wisdom point for learning all this. It gave him a hunger meter showing 85% and 3 suggestions. Turns out his castle sits in a place called the Imprisonment Forest, which the books describe as a monster spawning ground. The surrounding countries just built some watchtowers at the borders and said, "Not our problem." Really great. There was also some weird stuff about ancient demons being sealed away thousands of years ago, and his castle being built during the tail end of that demon war. The timeline didn't add up, and even the system told him to stay alert. His stomach finally reminded him that he had been too busy studying to solve the more urgent problem of starvation. Oleg stumbled towards the storage room like a drunk zombie, still finding energy to trash talk the system on the way. Does this count as forgetting to eat because Oleg was too devoted to studying? The place was a graveyard of food, flour that had turned into literal rock, and bread wearing fuzzy green party hats of mold throwing their own little death celebration system. When Oleg asked whether the spoiled food was edible, the system warned of 1,000% chance of catastrophic poisoning. Oleg was about to give up when Oleg spotted a weird chest in the back corner glowing with magic runes like it was showing off. Usually needed a password or bloodline verification to open. Oleg reached for it, thinking nothing would happen, and his hand went straight through the barrier. His chest armor lit up like a Christmas tree, and the magic shield around the chest rippled away like someone dropped a stone in a pond. The taste of wheat hit his tongue, and Oleg genuinely almost cried. A man who's been staring at moldy rocks for days has earned his bread tears. Then the magic ripples spread across the entire castle, lighting up every magical device for a brief moment. After inhaling everything in the chest, Oleg ran to the bedroom and found a book called Chronicles of Glenham Castle. The crest on the first page matched his armor exactly. Turns out the castle was built by the first Lord Herman, a guy who wanted to create a utopia where all races lived together. Then one day, the entire Herman family just vanished. The man in the painting had his hair color, his jawline, his face shape. He looked like his long-lost dad from a fantasy world. Main quest: rebuild Glenham Castle. This system is merely stating the ecological reality of the imprisonment forest. Oleg climbed to the top of the tower and looked out. Endless forest stretching to the horizon. Something howled in the distance, and every hair on his body stood up. One idiot in borrowed armor, surrounded by a monster forest. The system suggested Oleg could howl at the moon to vent his feelings, insult the system, but honestly still beats working 996. Oleg punched a stone pillar and cracked it like an egg, just casually with his fist. Strength 43. Can punch through a castle wall. Crafting 19 can build many things that fall apart easily. Oleg asked the system where Oleg ranked on this continent. Apparently, his strength was equal to an elite knight of the Nistad Empire. Oleg looked at his giant sword, his beautiful, terrifying 2-meter murder stick, just leaning against the wall, gleaming in the sunlight. What if Oleg used this thing as a barbell? Oleg grabbed the handle, heaved it overhead, and it slipped. The blade came screaming down toward his neck in a very elegant death arc. Oleg hit the floor butt first, touched his throat, and found the blade had stopped less than a centimeter from making him into a French Revolution reenactment. Oleg called the reckless idea innovation, smacked his helmet in realization, and returned from the forest carrying a boulder half his height. Oleg also tried to cut trees with the giant sword first, but the blade got stuck in a trunk and wouldn't come out. Next morning, full heavy armor, boulder hugged to his chest, running laps through the castle hallways. His footsteps sounded like a small earthquake, scared an entire flock of ravens out of their nests. The ravens probably thought the castle was collapsing. Meanwhile, the system confirmed Oleg could finally jog while carrying the giant sword, and the blade tip scraped along the ground, shooting sparks behind him like the world's most dangerous sparkler. The real game changer came the night his crafting hit 20. Oleg was on the roof patching a leak in the kitchen when suddenly, whoosh, knowledge flooded his brain like someone opened a dam. Woodworking joints, perfect iron tempering techniques, precise stone cutting angles, all of it just downloaded into his skull. When Oleg looked down, his hands had already finished the repair on autopilot. It was like being possessed by 1,000 dead craftsmen. Except instead of being creepy, it was awesome. Fixed every window, every table, every piece of broken furniture a single person could manage. His proudest project was a 4-post bed. The first version collapsed beneath him in the middle of the night. Oleg dragged entire trees out of the forest for that project system. Could Oleg made a living as a craftsman in this world? Current level mid-tier Imperial Artisan, only mid. Master artisans can forge magical equipment with bare hands. Every night, the forest howled and screamed with monster noises. Can Oleg took those forest monsters now? Audio analysis indicates the frequent howling belongs to creatures with strength values around 55 to 60. One night, after 500 weighted squats, Oleg was stuffing bread into his face and cleaning his armor when the system pinged. High-energy biological signature approaching the castle. His freshly repaired window exploded inward with shards everywhere like confetti at the worst party ever. In the moonlight stood a giant bat, 3-meter wingspan, membrane wings folding in like a leather umbrella. Its tail had a glowing blue stinger dripping with venom, and there was a small animal's severed limb still dangling from the barb. His voice came out like a broken squeaky toy. It stared at him with blood-red compound eyes glowing like demonic lanterns. It responded with an ultrasonic shriek that rattled his teeth. Special abilities: ultrasonic targeting, rotoxin system. Option 3, scream for mommy. Oleg pick option 4. Fight this ugly thing. The bat spread its wings again. That blue stinger cut through the air and straight at his heart. Oleg rolled across the floor like a tin can, armor screeching against stone. The bat swooped again, and Oleg lunged for his sword, fingertips barely touching the cold handle before this flying nightmare. Oleg yanked the sword up just in time. Sparks exploded like fireworks right in the bat's bloodshot eyeballs. The force slammed him backward into the wall, hard enough to rattle his ancestors. His boots carved grooves in the stone floor from being pushed back. Blood was turning the sword handle into a slip and slide system. His homemade weapon rack, the one Oleg was so proud of building, collapsed from all the shaking. A massive oak beam crashed down and nailed the bat's left wing. A horrifying, skin-crawling giant demon baby scream. Oleg leaped, swung the giant sword in a silver arc, and flack. The bat's head popped like an override pumpkin. The tail stinger snapped straight and launched at his face like a missile. Oleg jerked his head sideways, felt the wind on his cheek, and it buried itself in the stone wall behind him. Oleg stared at that steaming crater, and his throat went dry. Oleg collapsed right there in a puddle of toxic bad juice, 3 steps from the headless corpse that was still twitching. Oleg woke up to sunlight burning his eyelids and his right hand wrapped in green goo. It looked like someone poured acid on his nice castle. Oleg spent the next hour burying the headless bat beneath heavy rocks, like a criminal hiding evidence from the authorities, then ripping up his own floor because the bloodstains wouldn't wash out. He scraped away the corrupted floor and discarded it. Afterward, Oleg refused to remove his armor even while sleeping. Sure. Metal edges dug into his ribs every time Oleg rolled over. Sure. Oleg woke up with imprints on his skin like a waffle iron. Oleg refused to ever be cornered by one oversized bat again. Full power punch can demolish a castle wall. Slightly smarter than a high schooler. The system claimed almost nothing could break his defense, and that Oleg could fight continuously for 5 days. Oleg could lift his old training boulders with one finger. The giant sword felt like a toy now. No moss, no grime. It looked like someone had been wiping it regularly, while every other wall looked like a swamp. His improved perception exposed the suspicious wall because he had walked past it countless times without noticing the hidden seam. The entire wall slid open. The cover had Herman stamped in gold letters. His heart was hammering as Oleg opened it. The opening line addressed the future heir. Herman, if you're reading this, time is almost up, and his is running out. Your bloodline is a key and a curse. When your power crosses a certain threshold, demons will smell you. The last line twisted into blood-red symbols and drilled into his palm. Oleg shook his hand frantically, watching a creepy magical crest burn itself into his skin. Oleg was also a part-time demon hunter. Demon hostility towards you increased by 10%. Oleg slammed the book shut. Oleg turned to leave and heard a click behind him. By the time Oleg reached it, the trigger brick had turned into regular stone, without the burning crest on his palm. Oleg would have believed the entire secret room was a stress-induced hallucination. Oleg could suddenly feel something deep in the forest, something evil, something aware of him. After receiving the Malaga quest, Oleg stood at the castle gate one final time and studied the home he intended to restore. Sunlight through the broken ceiling, dust floating over his training ground. This dumpster of a castle was his home now. Wait for him, Oleg told it, patting his giant sword. Walking through this forest was like being stuck in the world's worst hiking trip. Every step Oleg took left a crater in the ground because apparently Oleg weighed as much as a small truck now. Twigs snapped under his boots like firecrackers. A squirrel ran face first into a tree root trying to escape him. Oleg carved X marks into trees with his sword as Oleg went. Big deep gashes that sent with chips raining down. The weird thing was, nothing attacked him. The books called the forest a monster factory. Yet Oleg had been walking for hours without encountering anything larger than a terrified squirrel. It was the kind of quiet that makes your neck hair stand up. Oleg kicked a branch so hard it flew like a javelin. It felt close when Oleg sensed it from the castle. Detecting elevated irritability, his legs blasted a crater into the dirt and landed 20 meters up in a treetop. First, a girl with long silver hair and ocean blue eyes, dress torn in 3 places, but still showing off fancy purple iris embroidery. Second, a soldier stumbling behind her, armor dented, one hand pressing a bleeding gut wound. Sword wrist twisted at an angle that made his wrist hurt just looking at it. The soldier yanked a broken arrow out of his side, casual, and said between coughs that their attackers were too skilled to be common bandits. The girl hoped they wouldn't follow this deep into the imprisonment forest. A guy with a nasty scar across his face strolled out from the shadows, crossbow in hand. 6 thugs behind him. Their leather armor was crusted with old blood, weapons still wet with fresh stuff. He was angry about how far she'd made them chase her, how many men he'd lost in this forest. His goons tied her wrists with rough rope and clamped an iron collar around her neck. The followers of the god are getting impatient, one thug muttered, missing half an ear and looking nervous. Let's get out of here before more monsters show up. Then Scarface got gross. He tilted the girl's face up, studying it in the moonlight like he was shopping, and made some disgusting comment about wanting to taste a noble. Scarface leaned in close and whispered that her father would cooperate just fine, unless he wanted his daughter's fingers mailed back to him one by one. She threw herself headfirst at the nearest tree trunk, trying to end it rather than be a hostage. Scarface yanked her back by the hair just in time, waving a red healing potion in her face. Oleg recognized the situation as a painfully familiar isekai rescue scene, identical to dozens of stories from his previous life. Handsome loner with overpowered stats drops from the sky to save a beautiful noble girl from bandits in a forest. Leaves and dirt exploded everywhere like a bomb went off. Oleg straightened up slowly, nearly 2 meters tall in full plate armor, giant sword casting the shadow behind him like the Grim Reaper's plus-sized cousin. Every piece of his gear was caked in dirt and dust from months of solo castle life, but even filthy. You could tell this armor was expensive. 6 bandits, 1 scarred villain, 1 tied-up girl, all staring at the armored maniac who just fell out of the sky like a meteorite. Scarface's voice sounded like he was gargling sandpaper. His eyes darted to the crest on his armor, and something flickered. Oleg had read enough novels to know that pretty noble girls can secretly be psychopathic tyrants who torture peasants for fun. What if Oleg rescue her, and she turns out to be the real villain? Then 3 quest notifications popped up at once. Rescue Fanny Rodney, daughter of the Lord of Malaga. Look, I wasn't really going to get involved, Oleg said, scratching his helmet. The metal screech echoed through the forest, while Oleg remembered that inheriting Glenham Castle technically made him a noble as well. Never mind then. Scarface saw his chance while Oleg was rambling and swung. Full power slashed right across his chest plate. His sword bounced off his armor like a toy. Recommend enemy switch weapon to a back scratcher. Oleg looked down at where he'd hit him, then looked at him. Oleg did not even put effort into it. The giant sword moved so fast. It was just a blur and a scream of torn air. Next second, his top half and bottom half were filing for divorce. One bandit struck an oak so violently that his spine made a sound Oleg expected to remember during future nightmares. Third poor bastard broke through an entire tree before stopping, limbs dangling at angles that shouldn't exist. Leaves gently floated down onto the girl's trembling dress, like nature was trying to be poetic about a massacre. Fanny, the silver-haired girl, was frozen solid, gripping her bloody skirt so hard her nails were cutting into her own palms. She wasn't scared of the gore. Oleg just bisected a man like Oleg was slicing bread. Oleg flicked the sword clean and turned toward her. Silver hair, blue eyes like the ocean. Pretty women are painted skulls. It's just post-combat adrenaline. Fanny flinched so hard she almost hit the ground again. Only afterward did Oleg realize he had shouted at Fanny while standing over multiple corpses in blood-covered armor. The system rewarded him a free attribute point for saving her, then immediately slapped him with a new quest. But that free attribute point, though, his stats hadn't budged past 90, no matter what Oleg did. One free point was worth more than a month of training. His eyes probably looked like slot machines. "You're lucky," Oleg told her, slinging the sword onto his back. Oleg explained he was already traveling toward Malaga. Fanny then dropped to one knee and offered a formal knight's salute. Fanny swore on House Rodney's honor to guide Oleg, but first asked him to return with her to the ambush site. More walking through Monster Forest? His favorite hobby. Oleg reached down and snapped her ropes like thread. Then Oleg looked at the iron collar on her neck, covered in glowing purple runes. She squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the magical backlash. Instead, she heard the sound of glass shattering. The magic runes were crumbling between his fingers like frost and sunlight. Oleg tore the collar in half like ripping a piece of paper and tossed the scraps aside. That shackle weakens external force and counterattacks anyone who tries to break it. Oleg said it like a question on purpose just to mess with her. Oleg knew it was his armor's anti-magic effect. But where's the fun in explaining? Why is that a question? She took a breath, walked to her dead soldier, and gently closed his eyes. A ring on her finger flashed, and the body vanished. "It's just the lowest grade storage item," she said, smoothing out her wreck dress. Oleg pulled up his stat screen in his head, wondering what to spend that beautiful, precious, hard-earned attribute point on. For guys with one swing, though, being level 90 in the starter zone hits different. The system showed him where to spend his free attribute point. The instant the point landed, his insides turned into a volcano. Every muscle locked up. His armor started whistling with high-pressure steam like a broken kettle, and a white tornado of vapor swirled around him. Fanny turned around and saw him vibrating like a human engine about to explode. Her silver hair went flying sideways, and her skin turned red. Oleg endured 30 seconds of feeling like a microwave burrito. Oleg flexed his fingers, squeezed his fist. The air cracked, a sonic boom from just closing his hand. Fanny stumbled backward as if Oleg had fired a cannon, while cracks spread outward from the place where he stepped. Oleg briefly imagined punching the earth apart, then immediately focused, before frightening Fanny with another uncontrolled step. Oleg tiptoed like Oleg was walking on eggs until Oleg figured out how to not cause earthquakes. Fanny admitted she had never seen or even heard legends describing strength on Oleg's terrifying level. The books in his castle said there were plenty of people who could destroy whole countries with one hit. She stared at him as if he had claimed the world was flat, then explained how badly the old empires had declined. The Agula's kingdom split apart ages ago, and the dragons just vanished. Fanny named Bindel Hedrick, chief archmage of the Strangable Kingdom, as the strongest living human known across the continent. Rumor says his full power attack can destroy a small hill. Oleg could blow away half a mountain right now. Oleg was basically a walking nuclear warhead in a world of firecrackers. But Oleg kept his cool. We walked on, found more dead guards along the way. When they finally left the forest, they discovered the ambush site filled with smashed carriages, broken weapons, and fallen guards. Fanny collected everyone, then grabbed a jeweled magic wand from a hidden compartment and a glowing red crystal. Fanny promised Oleg the spatial storage ring as payment once they safely reached Malaga. We kept walking until Malaga's stone walls appeared on the horizon. Not huge by his old world standards, but compared to his vine-covered ruin, recommend reading Castle Renovation for Dummies. Then, why don't you have any servants under his helmet? His castle's population was him, some spiders, and furniture Oleg built that probably collapsed the moment Oleg left. Let's talk about you instead. How'd you get ambushed with a whole escort near a village on the road? Something's wrong, she whispered, gripping her wand. Even if Father ordered people to stay indoors, it shouldn't be this silent. Danger probability, 187%. 1. Burn the village down. Oleg pulled Fanny behind him and planted his sword in the ground. Fanny raised her wand and admitted she lacked power, but promised to disrupt enemies and create openings for Oleg. Magic purity rating, B-. More than 30 armored riders thundered toward us. The leader held a lance with a fluttering banner. He's the captain of Malaga's guard. Anderson pulled up, eyeing him like Oleg was a loaded cannon, which was fair. His men aimed crossbows at him until they spotted Fanny. The old captain leaped off his horse, yanked his helmet off, revealing a scarred, weathered face, and dropped to one knee. And this is Sir Oleg, his savior and a landed noble knight. Anderson knelt to him too, pouring out gratitude. When Oleg helped Anderson rise, the captain's custom steel pauldron groaned beneath a grip Oleg considered extremely gentle. Then he noticed his giant sword sticking out of the ground like a flagpole, and Oleg could practically see him recalculating everything he thought he knew about human strength. Oleg just happened to be there, Oleg said, which was technically true if you ignored the system, literally ordering him to do it. Fanny told Anderson the whole story: the crystal, the ambush, the escape into the forest, the rescue. Anderson sent scouts to investigate the ambush site. Uncle Anderson, this village feels wrong. We think there might be an ambush. His face went dark. Anderson explained that the cultists had burned themselves alive before his soldiers arrived, leaving only a charred ritual parchment. Meanwhile, back in Malaga, Fanny's father, Claude, was apparently losing his mind with worry and dealing with a neighboring lord named Breck, who'd gotten his hands on an artifact that could control dragons and monsters. The red crystal Fanny retrieved was supposed to protect the city. Then the scout who'd entered the village came running back. A single scout returned, holding the ruined stump of his arm, reporting that invisible attackers had slaughtered everyone inside the fog. Eliminate the demon cultists and all lesser demons in the village. Note, your delivery has arrived. Demon takeout, and Oleg was the one who has to tip. The system ordered Oleg to eliminate every demon in the village, turning his first encounter with true hellspawn into another deadly assignment. Anderson tried to volunteer his soldiers instead, saying they'd sacrifice themselves so Oleg could protect Fanny. Oleg pulled the giant sword out of the ground one-handed, tossed it over his shoulder like a beach umbrella. You guys take Fanny and wait outside or go back to the city. She needed to deliver that dragon crystal to her father ASAP. Oleg caught the badge, stuffed it in his armor, and waved without looking back. Walking into that village felt like entering a horror movie set. Plates on tables, tools by doors, but zero people, zero sounds. The fog thickened with every step until Oleg could barely see 5 meters ahead. Regular water vapor plus trace amounts of demonic energy. By the time Oleg reached the center, the fog had sealed him in completely, like being trapped inside a cloud made of bad vibes. Pure malice rushing at his back. Oleg pretended not to notice, let the thing get close, and got launched through 3 houses like a cannonball. 3 wooden buildings exploded in sequence. When the dust cleared, Oleg finally got a look at his first demon. Human-shaped, covered in blood-red skin, ugly horns on its forehead, like someone tried to draw a person from memory while angry. Oleg could still sense hostility coming from it. So, Oleg raised his sword and smashed its head like a watermelon. Then the body started steaming and crumbled into ash, leaving just a person-shaped burn mark on the ground. 3 more demons exploded out of the fog at a speed that would have killed any normal person. Their top halves were still airborne when the sword wind sliced through a building wall behind them. Oleg jumped backward before a purple fireball exploded exactly where he had been standing. A robed figure stood in the distance, waving a staff. His glowing eyes went wide when Oleg appeared in front of him in a blink. His sword came down with the force of a meteor. He dodged barely, but the shockwave alone sent him flying through a house wall. Before Oleg could chase, magic chains erupted from the ground and wrapped around his legs. But a barrage of purple fireballs was already incoming. 5 of them, plus 7 or 8 lesser demons all surrounding him, dragging their injured buddy out of the rubble. Impressive strength, one cultist hissed in a creepy echoing voice, but nothing compared to the power our true God bestows upon us. His prayer got cut short when the top half of his body exploded into red mist. He walked from the smoke without a scratch and punched directly through the chanting cultist's reinforced body. The remaining cultists scattered like roaches when you turn the lights on. The demons, being stupider, charged straight at him. One cultist raised a magic shield. It smashed through the shield, through him, and into the wall behind. turning everything into paste. His staff and his spine broke at the same time. Then Oleg grabbed his head with one hand and his arm with the other, and well, let's just say he became two separate people permanently. Oleg caught the next one with a fist straight through his torso. The last cultist was still twitching on the ground from earlier. Oleg stood in the middle of a destroyed village, sword planted in the dirt. Oleg pulled out his sword and flicked off the purple blood, detecting successful display of overwhelming dominance. The fog vanished the instant the last cultist popped under his boot like someone pulled away a curtain. Sunset painted everything red, which was fitting because everything was already red. Oleg sheathed his sword and flicked purple blood off his fingers. But Oleg could not enjoy it because now with the fog gone and the light pouring in, Oleg could actually see the village. A mother's headless body still frozen in a hugging pose. In the village center, bodies had been arranged into a six-pointed star pattern, dried blood glowing purple in the grooves between them. There was a little cloth bracelet on its wrist, clumsily stitched with the words, "Mommy's love," now soaked black with blood. Oleg suddenly remembered that dusty children's songbook in his castle library, the illustration of kids dancing around a campfire system, souls contaminated by demonic energy. Oleg stood there for a while saying nothing. Demon cultists could turn corpses into skeleton soldiers. Black smoke climbed into the sky just as the last sliver of sun disappeared below the horizon, like even the heavens were saying goodbye. Walking out of that village under a dark sky, Oleg pulled out Fanny's lion badge and studied it in the moonlight. Quest escort Fanny Rodney safely to Malaga. His voice came out quieter than Oleg expected. Would you like psychological support? You, a system offering therapy? This system includes a basic emotional analysis module and can provide recommendations based on host state. What should Oleg be thinking about anger can fuel progress, but should not control decisions. That's actually not terrible advice. Moonlight tracing a pale road toward Malaga across the dark fields. Before today, Oleg did not really care about the whole family destiny, demon invasion storyline. Oleg just wanted to be powerful enough to live comfortably and not die. Those weren't quest objectives lying in the dirt back there. His hatred for demons wasn't about duty anymore. Some of Anderson's scouts returning from the ambush site. Oleg waved them off where Lady Fanny and Captain Anderson already in the city. Another offered to escort him to the city. Anderson's probably losing his mind waiting. They rode off, and honestly, the interruption helped. Sometimes you need someone to accidentally remind you that normal, awkward human interaction still exists. Oleg walked and sorted his head out. Oleg could not save everyone, but within his reach, he would no longer stand aside. The kind of walk where your shoulders move independently and you look like you own every inch of ground beneath you. Time to spend points for attribute points available. If Oleg had been even slightly slower, the binding chains would have trapped him beneath an entire barrage of demonic fire. Attributes above 90 demanded additional points, but Oleg still needed to test his newly upgraded agility against a distant tree. He probably looked ridiculous adopting a sprinter's stance in full plate armor, but nobody was nearby to judge him. The shockwave from his own legs had crystallized into a glass-like ripple in the air. Then Oleg reached out to touch the ripple in reality, snapped back to full speed. One heartbeat later, Oleg stood beside the tree 100 meters away while the delayed sonic boom flattened the grass behind him. When Oleg went all out, time itself seemed to slow down around him. The whole world hit pause, and Oleg was the only one still moving. If those cultists try their chain trick again, they won't even see him coming. If agility hits max, would it be actual real-time stop? Oleg speedwalked toward the city gates like a man fleeing his own imagination. Malaga's walls grew clearer ahead, torches blazing, armored guards checking everyone coming in. The quest was done, but the reward tasted like ash, because now Oleg could see what those demons had actually done to this village. There was a child with a handmade bracelet that said, "Mommy's love" on it. Oleg remained beside the child's body until grief loosened its grip enough for him to move again. Some necromancer freak could dig them up and turn them into skeleton puppets. Fire was the only way to make sure they stayed at peace. Oleg lit the pea with a piece of burning wood. The last sunlight vanished at the exact same moment, like the sky was closing its eyes. Oleg walked out of that village a different person than when Oleg walked in. Got the notification that Fanny made it to the city safely. The This system has a basic emotional analysis module. That was actually solid advice from a sarcastic AI that once suggested Oleg howl at the moon. Before today, the whole demon-fighting destiny thing was just a storyline Oleg happened to be stuck in. If demon armies break the seal, historical data projects 90% extinction of all life on the continent. Then, Oleg guessed they don't get to break the seal. Some of Anderson's scouts found him on the road. They offered to escort him to the city, and Oleg laughed so hard his mood actually recovered. Go report in before Anderson has a heart attack. Sometimes you need someone to accidentally remind you that normal, slightly awkward human moments still exist. Oleg dumped 4 attribute points into agility. The system charges premium rates at the top end, but 91 agility was worth every point. A moth was stuck mid-flap like a paused video. The shockwave from his own legs had turned into a visible glass ripple in the air. Oleg was standing inside a frozen world alone, perfectly still while everything else waited. The sonic boom hit a full second later and nearly knocked the tree over. If those cultists try to chain him again, they won't even see him blink. If agility maxes out, real time stop. And if time is frozen theoretically, Oleg could. Oleg Power walked toward Malaga like a man running from his own brain. At the gate, every guard in a 10-meter radius pointed weapons at him. Oleg was a nearly 2-meter-tall blood-covered stranger in full blade armor, carrying a sword bigger than most people. Oleg tossed Fanny's lion badge at the nearest guard like Oleg was flipping a coin. The poor guy caught it one-handed, while his other hand stayed glued to his sword. Oleg leaned against the wall and closed his eyes. Could hear the soldiers on the wall above him whispering stuff like, "Look at that sword, and is that purple blood?" And Oleg was not fighting that guy. And there, walking through personally, was Lord Claude, Fanny's father, with Fanny right beside him, fresh dress, silver hair brushed, and glowing in the last light, looking like an actual noble lady instead of a forest survivor. Fanny curtsied like she was at a royal ball, silver hair cascading in the moonlight. Her father Claude, Lord of Malaga and Bound, the chief mage, her magic teacher. Claude stepped forward with his cape, doing that dramatic wind flutter thing. This guy wasn't a pampered desk lord. You saved not just his daughter, but the hope of House Rodney, he said, voice deep and commanding. Oleg could feel every hidden guard in the shadows gripping their weapons and staring at him. Oleg was sure someone else would have saved her if Oleg hadn't. Claude laughed, swept his cape aside, and announced that he had prepared a room for Oleg inside the Lord's keep. As they crossed the market square, Fanny stayed beside Oleg like an energetic guide who had consumed several strong coffees. She dropped her voice to a whisper, then suddenly went pink in the ears and changed the subject so fast, Oleg got whiplash. She pointed at a bright 3-story building with bronze magic crystal lamps swaying in the breeze. Fanny pointed out the Paragon Tavern, famous for musicians, travelers, and honey-glazed ribs that immediately distracted Oleg's starving stomach. His stomach growled like a monster, while his mind raced through everything his ruined castle needed from Malaga's craftsmen. Huge stone walls glowing silver in the moonlight, towers poking up at the stars. Claude slowed down and got nostalgic about how his grandfather built this city from nothing. Just wilderness and monster forest. While he talked, Oleg noticed Bound the mage never took his hand off his staff. Oleg claimed he was merely tired, and Claude accepted the answer before ordering him to attend lunch the following day. The youngest one kept sneaking looks at him, then spotted the purple blood crystals stuck in his armor joints, and immediately stared at the floor like Oleg was a walking horror movie. Walking down a hallway full of ancestor paintings, the young maid tripped on the carpet edge and crashed into him. Oleg caught her on reflex. She looked up, saw the purple demon blood gleaming between his armor plates, and made a noise like a mouse seeing a cat. His voice came out muffled and deep through the helmet, which probably made it less reassuring. Velvet curtains hanging from a 4-poster bed, a crackling fireplace, carpet so thick his boots sank into it. After months of sleeping on a self-built bed in a ruined castle, sometimes in full armor on a stone floor, the maids offered to help him remove his armor, the smell that came out when the armor came off. Oleg had not enjoyed a proper bath since arriving in the new world, making his sealed armor smell like a biological weapon. The gold-trimmed bathtub in the corner was already filled with warm, fragrant water, an actual bath, hot water, soap that smelled like flowers, but even floating in paradise. His mind kept circling back to that flash of malice at the gate. Recent demonic energy contact detected. After the bath, Oleg put on the linen shirt and dark blue coat they'd left out. Oleg spent the rest of the evening polishing his armor by moonlight. The velvet bed was the softest thing he had touched during his entire second life. Oleg rolled off the bed and had his sword in hand before his feet hit the floor. Multiple sources, different directions scattered across the city. Hire craftsmen for his castle and stop a demon conspiracy. He had been so distracted by hot water and comfort that he nearly forgot the demonic conspiracy bringing him to Malaga. Oleg put his armor back on, lay down on the fancy bed, hugging his giant sword like a teddy bear, cold steel against his chest. Let him sleep one night without something trying to kill him. Oleg did not feel confident about those odds. Fanny's voice way too cheerful for morning. Oleg was standing there in full armor, polished, but clearly slept in. Her eyes traveled from his shiny shoulder plates down to his boots, still wet with morning dew. The disappointment on her face could have filled a swimming pool. She put on a brand new lake blue dress with a silver chain belt. Fanny had clearly dressed for the feast, while Oleg looked as though he had never left the battlefield. Everyone's waiting. The oak doors opened, and Oleg was hit by the greatest combination of smells his nose had ever experienced. The table was a battlefield of deliciousness. Caramel-glazed roast suckling pig, rosemary lamb leg, honey-drizzled pancakes, silver utensils glittering like treasure, crystal glasses throwing little rainbows on the ceiling. You have to understand, Oleg had been eating nothing but bread for months, and now, suddenly, there was a whole roast pig staring at him with crispy skin, and Oleg almost proposed to it. "Our knight seems hungry," Fanny whispered behind her hand, giggling. "Please, no need for formality." "All right." Then Oleg reached up and took off his helmet. Claude's knife scraped his plate with a horrible screech. He was probably doing math in his head about how old he'd been at his age and how much weaker he was. Bound the mage stroked his mustache so hard Oleg thought he'd pull it off. Oleg mumbled through a mouthful of honey-glazed ham, grease running down his chin. Claude and Bound exchanged a look and nodded. They were confirming to each other that befriending him was the right call. Political calculation happening in real time over roast pork. One brave servant quietly slipped 2 extra plates of roast chicken next to him. Oleg appreciated that man with his entire soul. Hard to be intimidated by a guy who's got sauce on both cheeks and is making happy noises at a chicken leg. After a few rounds of drinks, Claude got serious. Then Claude placed 2 more items on top. An ice crystal wolf medallion, the highest tier pass for the Silver Moon Trading Company, and a golden Rodney family badge. With these, you can go anywhere in Malaga freely. Okay, it was a little bit greed, but mostly Oleg was thinking about his castle, his poor, crumbling, vine-covered disaster of a home. With this money, Oleg could hire real craftsmen, buy real materials, fix real walls. "This is too generous," Oleg said, wiping his greasy fingers on his leg armor because Oleg was the pinnacle of class. The treasure chest was placed at his feet, and Oleg heard Fanny trying not to laugh. But Oleg hadn't come here just for food and money. Oleg set down his wine cup with a sharp clink. "Lord Claude, there's something that concerns the survival of this entire city." Claude explained that cultists killed themselves whenever guards located them, apparently feeding a sacrifice spread across multiple hidden sites. Every cultist who dies is storing up energy. Oleg looked at each person at the table. Fanny's spoon hit the floor with a clang. The word demon hit the room like a brick through a window. Bound slammed his staff on the floor so hard, the echo bounced around the hall 3 times. The old mage stared at him like Oleg just told him the sky was falling, which honestly wasn't far off. Claude and Fanny knew demons from bedtime stories, but seeing Bound, the guy who hadn't flinched once since Oleg met him, looking like he'd seen a ghost that told them everything they needed to know. Bound was on his feet, eyes locked on Oleg, practically begging him to say Oleg was joking. Claude gripped his sword handle. Bound stroked his mustache, pacing, connecting dots between the recent cultist attacks and demon activity. The book showed demons, red-skinned, massive deformed horns, faces ugly enough to curdle milk, all born with fire magic, purple blood, insanely strong even at low levels. "The gates of hell were sealed 1,000 years ago," Bound explained, flipping pages with shaking hands. "Their cultists kept popping up, but nobody took them seriously, just treated them like regular crazy people. But the paintings in taverns showed demons as cute little goblins, Fanny said, tracing a silly imp shape in the air. Bound's voice dropped because everyone who saw a real demon and tried to paint it ended up as bones on an altar. Then Bound projected a complex six-pointed ritual circle onto the table. It was the same pattern they've been finding at cult sites all over the city. Their blood flows into the circle, and the more blood that accumulates across multiple sites, the stronger the demon they can summon. Claude admitted his forces had found 7 completed ritual sites. Although destroying the circles had not erased their stored sacrificial energy, he grabbed a wine jug and chugged it. Anderson, the guard captain, sprinted in, his lion badge bouncing with every step. Silver Moon Company stops all non-essential trade. Searched the entire city for cultists. Sir Anderson was gone before the echo faded. Then, Claude dropped to one knee in front of him. Without your warning, Malaga would have been doomed. You saved him, and now you're saving the whole city. Oleg pulled them both up fast because this was getting uncomfortable, especially since Oleg knew that without the system quest. Oleg might have stood in that tree debating whether to help for another 5 minutes. Claude's eyes brightened, as though Oleg had offered him a valuable gift instead of requesting construction workers. Claude promised to send his chief engineer and every available craftsman to rebuild Glenham Castle after the crisis ended. Bound admitted the request was shameless, but asked Oleg to help if the cultists successfully summoned a true demon. If the cultists get desperate and summon one, could you help us defeat it? Oleg already told you demons are his sworn enemies. Oleg grabbed his helmet, locked it on, walked to the door, and picked up his giant sword behind him. Bound was charging his staff with magic, layering buff spells on himself like a walking light show. Claude came back from his room in full combat gear, sword, shield, and halberd. Fanny pulled out her wand, ready to join, but Claude stopped her. The castle needs someone in charge, and you need to install the dragon crystal into the shield core. Her eyes dimmed, then blazed with determination. Oleg watched her go, then turned to join Claude and Bound. The city had transformed into a war machine. Claude picked a small squad of soldiers and waved the rest back to searching. While they marched, Oleg briefed Claude and Bound on the village rituals: binding chains, demonic fog, fire magic, and purple blood. Claude and Bound took mental notes like they were cramming for the most important exam of their lives. The cultist hideout wasn't in some creepy cave or abandoned temple. The final hideout occupied an ordinary neighborhood home, proving the cultists had been hiding among innocent families instead of remote ruins. All those previous cult sites had been in remote locations. The closer they came, the stronger the malice screamed inside Oleg's senses. He nodded at Claude and kicked open the door. But Bound had already thrown up a magic shield, and the fireballs fizzled into nothing against it, like bugs on a windshield. Sure, Oleg could tank fireballs in his armor, but why eat punches when you can block them? Claude charged in the moment the fireballs cleared, glowing with Bound's protective buffs like a Holy Knight action figure. Once he realized the magic shield could block demon spells, the man became fearless. Every other time the city had raided a cult site, they only found ash. The cultists shrieked, a metal-on-metal screech that made several soldiers grab their heads in pain. While the troops were stunned, the cultists fired more spells, all blocked by Bound's shield. The same demonic chains Oleg had fought in Devel wrapped around soldiers, burning through armor and flesh. Claude blocked with his shield, and in the split second the explosion created, he hurled his halberd like a javelin. The cultist deflected it with a magic shield and started to jump backward, but Claude had already dropped his shield, drawn his sword, and closed the gap. Here's the thing about having 91 agility. Everything looks like slow motion. It was like watching an action movie at 1/10 speed. Oleg could see every detail, every sword angle, every footwork shift, every tactical decision Claude made. When the chains grabbed the soldiers, Oleg almost stepped in, but Oleg caught Bound's calm little smile and subtle nod. He could read the battlefield 10 steps ahead. Meanwhile, his combat strategy in Devil was basically run fast, hit hard, break everything, zero technique, pure caveman energy. Oleg realized that Claude would completely outclass him in technique if both warriors possessed equal physical attributes. Of course, technique matters less when you can literally one-shot anything. But still, Oleg should probably learn actual combat skills. Oleg thought. If nothing else, it had helped him stop accidentally demolishing buildings every time Oleg swung. After the fight, Claude and Bound examined the ritual room behind the blown-out wall. Every other one had been ashes by the time they arrived. "We got here just in time," Bound said, touching the still wet blood. Low-level cultists. But their coordination could trip up mid-tier fighters easily. The altar, half the wall, and a good chunk of ceiling turned into flying rubble. Debris pinged off Bound's hastily raised barrier like hail. Oleg asked, sword awkwardly stuck in the ground, scratching his helmet. Claude laughed behind his faceplate. These contaminated buildings were going to be demolished anyway. Bound waved away the dust cloud, though. "This kid fights like a bulldozer with no driver's license. Sorry. Still working on controlling his strength," Oleg mumbled. Oleg could tell your combat experience is still developing once this crisis is over. An explosion from across the city cut him off. "Other soldiers found another ritual site," Claude said, instantly switching to commander mode. "Sir Oleg, you can sense where the cultists are hiding. Bound and Oleg will handle the other locations and catch up." After splitting from Claude and Bound, Oleg followed the nastiest trail of demonic malice to a cluster of connected houses that looked like sleeping monsters in the twilight. Cozy neighborhood, lovely curb appeal, definitely full of demon cultists. Turns out the cultists had been paying attention. When the city went into lockdown and one of their hideouts went quiet, they figured they were blown. The entire building exploded into a pillar of fire, turning the house into a very aggressive firework. At this point, his gear had tank demon fire, bat venom, and his own cooking disasters. But before Oleg could move forward, magic walls erupted from the ground on all sides, boxing him in like a rat cage. Then spikes shot out of every wall surface, stabbing at him from every direction. His armor just stood there, taking it like a board bouncer. Oleg spread his arms and punched both walls simultaneously. The shockwave kept going, though way too far. By the time the dust settled, the entire street looked like someone had run a plow through it. Oleg could feel them in the next building over. Multiple sources of malice all pointed at him like invisible spotlights. Oleg walked up to the wall separating us and punched straight through it. Oleg's fist passed through the wall and destroyed a cultist in mid-chant before he even saw the target. The flying debris turned into a shotgun blast of stone fragments aimed at the room full of cultists. These guys were coordinated way better than the devil amateurs. They launched spells from 6 different angles and tried the purple chain trick on his feet again. The sonic boom alone knocked dust off every surface in a tub block radius. When Oleg reappeared, Oleg was already standing among them. Oleg drew the giant sword mid-movement and swung horizontally through the next two. 2 bodies became 4 pieces, and the wall behind them gained a new doorway. These ranked cultists were stronger and more coordinated than anything Oleg had fought earlier that night. His enhanced eyes could actually track him this time, which just meant he got to watch the sword come down in perfect horrifying clarity. They saw their buddies get shredded and immediately pulled out daggers pulsing with thick demonic energy. Instead of fighting him, they aimed the blades at their own hearts, trying to sacrifice themselves to complete whatever ritual quota they needed. The giant sword came down with the weight of a mountain. Both of them turned into paste before the daggers reached their chests. The malice was still there, still crawling around the air like invisible smoke. Their remains began trembling, bubbling, flowing upward like melting wax in reverse. The puddles of meat merged, climbing higher, forming a shape, a tall shape, a very tall shape. The blade passed clean through like cutting fog, hit the rubble behind it, and demolished another wall segment. Features sharpening, limbs growing, horns twisting out of its skull like corkscrews made of bone. Standing in front of him was a full-blown goat-horned demon. This wasn't a lesser demon or a cultist playing dress-up. Fire churned in its right palm, then solidified into a weapon, a jagged blade with screaming human skulls hanging from the hilt. The demon charged fast, way faster than anything its size should move. It brought the skull blade down on his head with enough force to split a building in half. The impact cracked the earth beneath Oleg's boots in a spiderweb pattern 6 meters wide. Oleg could feel the agony of those trapped souls vibrating through his blade. While their swords remained locked, the demon gathered purple fire in its free hand and slammed it into Oleg's chest plate. Soldiers who'd been running toward the noise froze mid-step, paralyzed by the sight of an actual demon from hell standing in the smoking crater. Its eyes lit up with the kind of excitement a cat gets when it spots a mouse. "You're the strongest thing I've fought so far," Oleg said, rolling his wrist casually. If Claude or Bound had taken that hit, they'd probably be dead. The demon's attack was powerful, but the shadow bat that invaded Glenom Castle had frightened Oleg far more. Oleg just called it weaker than a bat. To its face, it screamed in rage, flames erupting along its blade, and brought the abomination's sword down with everything it had. Then the demon's body split apart along a dozen purple lines that appeared simultaneously, like someone had drawn on it with a razor. It came apart in chunks, burning, disintegrating before the pieces hit the ground. But in that last instant, as the demon's severed head tumbled through the air, its eyes locked onto his chest plate, onto the crest of House Herman. Oleg saw its pupils dilate. He saw recognition and terror. Something ancient and primal that went beyond this one demon's existence. Meanwhile, and Oleg only found this out later, Claude and Bound were having their own party across town. They'd found another ritual site, rescued wounded soldiers, and set up a textbook tactical formation. A shield wall held the front, archers and mages in the back, Bound providing lightning support from above. Then their demon showed up, smaller than his. No special weapon, but still way beyond anything a normal soldier could handle. Claude used the opening to drive his halberd into the demon's neck, but it didn't go deep enough for a kill shot. Claude touched the lion crest on his armor, slammed his fist against it like he was making a promise, and charged back in. His entire army followed with a battle cry, spreading out to surround the demon while ranged fighters kept it pinned. While Oleg was off-speed, blitzing through demon cultists and turning a goat horn nightmare into confetti, Claude and Bound were having their own epic showdown across town. Their demon was smaller than his. No fancy skull sword, no dramatic entrance speech, but it was still a full-blown hellspawn that could shrug off regular weapons like mosquito bites. They fought like they'd been drilling for this their entire lives. The frontline soldiers charged at the demon, then stopped dead right in front of it. The demon's momentum carried it forward, stumbling, and the flanking squad unleashed a blizzard of steel from the side. Each individual hit was basically a scratch, but dozens of blades hammering the same spot over and over finally tore through the demon's skin. Back and forth, keeping it off balance, never letting it focus on one group long enough to kill anyone. Staff raised overhead, blazing with light so bright it hurt to look at. The mages behind him were channeling all their power into his staff, like he was a magical battery being supercharged. It screamed so hard it knocked the surrounding soldiers back, then charged straight at Bound like a freight train, aimed at a floating old man. Not magic in the traditional sense, more like he was burning his own life force as fuel. Red after images trailed behind his movements. The demon's claw swipe hadn't even reached him when Claude was already inside its guard. The impact knocked the demon back to full steps. Claude's red aura flowed into the weapon, pushing it deeper. Skull, half the halberd, buried in demon flesh. But it wasn't enough for a kill. The demon grabbed the hollard shaft with one claw and raised the other to smash Claude into paste. Bound's work even while charging his ultimate attack and locked the demon's wrist in place, all of them aiming for the wound Claude had made. Claude kicked off the demon's chest. The sunball elongated into a massive spear of pure holy light, radiant, blinding, humming with enough energy to level a building. It flew straight and true, punching directly into the wound Claude had carved open. Light erupted from inside its body like cracks in a shell. The mage squad threw up barriers instantly, tainting the blast radius. Chunks of burning demons scattered and disintegrated before they could land. Claude caught him around the waist, like they'd rehearsed this exact scenario before. "Still got fighting you." Old friend Claude shoved a mana potion at Bound's lips. Before Claude could answer, a building collapsed half a city away. The victory cheers cut off instantly as everyone heard the boom echo across rooftops. Claude squinted at the rising pillar of smoke and dust and has demolished another half block in the process. Bound swallowed another mana potion and estimated his reserves would recover slightly before they reached Oleg's battlefield. Because apparently his combat style is so recognizable, you can navigate by the property damage. When Claude's group returned to the intersection where they had separated, terrified soldiers stumbled toward them with astonishing news. The other soldiers had to physically hold them back until they calmed down enough to speak coherently. Claude walked up to them, Why are you all so worked up? The soldiers tripped over each other trying to explain. We were searching nearby, heard explosions, went to investigate, red skin, giant horns wrapped in flames, holding a terrifying blade in one hand and purple fire in the other. Bound muttered that the creature sounded even larger than the demon his own group had barely defeated. The soldier continued, voice shaking, but now with something closer to awe than fear. It looked at us. The soldier admitted everyone expected death until Oleg appeared behind the demon and cut it apart before anyone could react. And in the time it takes to blink, the demon was in pieces. It had been cut apart like it was nothing. The night he cut that thing apart, before any of us even understood what was happening, Claude sent them to the medical camp with healers, then stood there for a moment, staring in the direction the soldier had pointed. No matter how many times Oleg learned about Sir Oleg's strength, he said quietly, gripping his halberd, it never stops being terrifying. Claude acknowledged that his entire force had struggled against one demon, while Oleg destroyed a stronger enemy alone and continued hunting. By the time they arrived, Oleg was standing in yet another landscape of rubble. Demonic blood steamed from his sword after Oleg had already cleared another cultist's nest beyond the first major battle. Kick wall. Find bad guys. Introduce them to gravity and blunt force trauma. Claude's steel boots crunched through debris as he approached, helmet under his arm, face lined with exhaustion and gratitude. Claude thanked Oleg for saving Malaga again, but Oleg merely pointed toward the final and strongest source of malice. Clear that out, and this should be over. Bound adjusted his grip on his staff, looking less shaky now. One more nest, one more fight. Then, maybe Oleg could finally get some sleep. Oleg carried a demon-slaying sword beside Claude's crimson enhancement, Bound's holy magic, and dozens of soldiers hungry for revenge, and about 50 very angry soldiers who just killed their first demon and were hungry for seconds. We reached the last ritual site, and immediately something felt wrong. Blood splattered everywhere, broken weapons scattered across the ground, scorch marks on walls, but no bodies, not a single corpse. Where do you have a battle with 0 casualties left behind? The malice was concentrated, thick, pulsing like a heartbeat made of pure hatred. Oleg approached the door, lifted his foot to kick it in. His signature move at this point. Out walked a cultist. But not like the others. This guy was half converted. He was the boss cultist, the one running the whole show. The cultist looked past Oleg like he was furniture and stared directly at Claude, claiming they had awaited this meeting. Maggots don't get to talk to him. Claude's halberd scraped the ground, throwing sparks. Oleg liked Claude's trash talk. The cultist leader didn't even flinch. And when Oleg said, smiled. Oleg mean, his mouth split open almost to his ERS, dripping thick purple-black drool like a broken faucet. Something covered in so much blood, it was barely recognizable as a person. It was Anderson, the guard captain, the veteran who'd knelt before him at the city gates, the man who'd protected Fanny since she was a child. His body was covered in torture marks, burns, cuts, things Oleg did not want to describe. He was barely alive, hanging on by sheer stubbornness and nothing else. Claude's halberd hit the ground with a clang that echoed through the ruins. No plan, no formation, no tactics, just raw, blind fury. Bound tried to grab him, but his magic reserves were too low. They're provoking you on purpose. But Claude couldn't hear anything over the blood pounding in his ears. He reached the cultist leader and thrust his halyard straight at the monster's heart. Oleg thought a noble lord would have better self-control. The leader mocked Claude for losing control whenever someone he loved suffered, then prepared the ritual dagger meant to create a vessel. The same kind of sacrificial blade the other cultists had tried to stab into their own hearts, except this one was aimed at Claude. His right hand caught the leader's dagger hand and crushed it, all of it ground to powder in his grip. With his left hand, Oleg open-palmed Claude in the chest and launched him backward through the air, sending him tumbling across the rubble, Oleg said. But the leader was laughing through his pain. His left hand produced another ritual dagger from nowhere. At the same time, magic chains erupted from the ground and locked his other arm. Shoot. Shoot now, Bound screamed, voice cracking with terror. Claude hit the ground hard, dust mushrooming around him. Through the haze, he watched helplessly as multiple ritual daggers plunged toward him simultaneously. His loss of control had led him into this trap. The cultist leader's grin stretched impossibly wide. Our god will surely send the mightiest divine guardian to inhabit this vessel. The leader ordered his god's glory to descend, but his expression collapsed when every ritual dagger bounced harmlessly from Oleg's armor, the cursed blades that were supposed to penetrate anything. Blessed by their demon god to pierce any material, any enchantment, any defense, had bounced off his chest plate like plastic toys hitting a bank vault. He screamed that the blades carried divine power capable of penetrating everything, then stabbed again with the same useless result. Oleg let him stab him a few more times, just to really drive the point home. Each dagger bounced off with a cheerful little ting. Oleg ripped free of the chains with his left arm, grabbed his giant sword, and swung one-handed. The shockwave alone split every cultist, their altar, and the entire building behind them clean in half. Claude, still on the ground, leaped up and caught the broken body of Anderson as it was flung into the air by the shockwave. He'd been split in two by the sword wind, but was somehow still alive. Demon blood apparently makes you very hard to kill. He glared up at him with pure concentrated hatred. The dying leader confessed that Oleg had ruined every stage of the plan, from kidnapping Fanny to distracting Malaga's defenders. If not for you, the cultists outside the city would have drawn away the soldiers. If not for you. While Claude fought one divine guardian, the other would have completed all these sacrifices. The leader repeated that everything had failed because of Oleg. He coughed out the conspiracy like Oleg had personally destroyed his celebration, which was almost exactly what happened. Sounds like a skill issue, Oleg said. His voice rose to a scream. Your faithful servant offers everything. God, your followers give their all. The quest notification was still active. A weak body, but enough to Anderson. The demon is going to use his body. Every cultist corpse and scattered remain from the sites they had cleared dissolved into streams of crimson sacrificial energy. Rivers of crimson light flew through the air from all directions, all converging on one point. Claude was still holding Anderson, still pouring potions, still refusing to let go. Couldn't move. 40 years of loyalty pinning him to the spot. The right one, the only one that wasn't a bloody socket. The pupil was cloudy, fading, but for one brief moment, it focused. Anderson's voice was barely a whisper, a dying man's last breath-given sound. Claude, the unshakable lord who had faced demons without blinking, finally broke while holding his oldest friend. He started crying right there, holding his oldest friend in the middle of a war zone. He reminded Anderson that they had fought together for nearly 30 years and that his promise had not yet reached its end. Claude admitted he had always been busy ruling the city, while Anderson had remained beside Fanny and helped raise her. He begged Anderson not to leave Fanny or abandon the few old companions still surviving beside him. Purple-black veins started crawling across Anderson's skin like cracks in ice. And in that final second, Anderson, a man with zero magical talent, a pure warrior his entire life, somehow cast a spell. A burst of force that pushed Claude away. Anderson screamed his last words at the sky. Anderson apologized that he could no longer remain beside Fanny and begged forgiveness from the Lord he had served faithfully. The consciousness that was Anderson, the loyal soldier, the surrogate uncle, the man who knelt in the dirt to thank him at the city gates, was gone. The blood energy swallowed him whole. His body began to swell, to inflate, to transform. Flesh twisted and expanded until what had been a broken human body was now a massive pulsating egg of blood and meat hovering above the rubble. Claude stared at the blood egg with empty eyes, and Oleg stood there gripping his sword, watching a good man get turned into a demon egg, and made himself a promise. Whatever hatches out of that thing. Oleg was putting it down for Anderson, for the village, for every soul these monsters consumed. The soldiers went absolutely berserk on that blood egg. Swords, spears, arrows, magic, everything they had, all at once, non-stop. Every spell got absorbed like the egg was drinking it. The blood egg consumed every attack, transformed that energy into growth, and repaired each wound before the weapons could withdraw. A massive room shaking pulse that made the rubble dance with every beat. The blade went straight through the egg like cutting smoke. Same thing that happened when the goat demon was forming earlier. The egg existed in some halfway dimension, partially in reality and partially somewhere else. His sword split the ground in front of them as a warning. cracks spreading all the way to the egg's base, which promptly healed itself. Even damaging the ground around it was pointless. Our attacks aren't just failing, Oleg muttered, gripping his sword handle. He was going to charge the egg and try to destroy it through sheer willpower. The same technique that Bound had warned could kill him because his body was too old to handle it. Bound grabbed his arm, digging fingers into the gaps of his armor. "You're not the young man you used to be." Blood was already leaking from the corners of Claude's mouth. Claude insisted that more innocent people would die if they failed to destroy the thing before it hatched. It spun through the air and slammed into the ground half an inch in front of Claude's face, close enough to shave his eyebrows. The impact shockwave cut through his crimson aura and forced his body to stop mid-charge. Oleg was at his side in a blink, grabbed his trembling shoulder plate, looked him dead in the eyes through his visor. Dying heroically doesn't suit a commander, and it definitely doesn't suit a father. Oleg delivered the gentlest slap he could control. Although the impact still launched Claude's helmet across the battlefield, his helmet rocketed off his head and bounced across the ground like a tin can. Claude hit the ground flat on his back, staring up at the sky. For a moment, he seemed to see something up there, something nobody else could see. Whatever he saw, whoever he saw, brought him back from the edge. Oleg knew it wasn't his place to slap a lord across the face. Bound stormed over and punched Claude in the back so hard his armor rang like a gong. "Your dad saw Anderson die, and then threw his life away like an idiot, charging at an invincible egg." Claude looked at Bound's furious, worried face. Kids, some of them gripping their weapons with shaking hands, but still waiting for his orders, still trusting him. Then he looked toward the castle keep, where the first rays of dawn were piercing through the clouds where Fanny was waiting. Only the wet, rhythmic thump of the blood egg filled the gap. When he opened them again, the Lord was back, not the raging berserker, the leader. Claude unclasped the lion medallion from his chest and extended it toward Oleg with both authority and complete trust. He declared Oleg the only expert capable of handling the creature and transferred full command of Malaga's forces to him. Oleg protested that he had never commanded soldiers or carried responsibility for an army's lives. He had spent months alone in a castle talking to spiders. But Claude's calm expression refused every excuse. Giving orders to military professionals felt absurd for a former shut-in gamer who had learned combat by punching rocks. First and most important, none of you can participate in this fight directly. Your attacks feed the egg, and whatever comes out of it will be way beyond what you can handle. Oleg ordered every ranged unit to maximum distance and forbade them from firing unless he signaled, or the situation became catastrophic. He demanded enough empty space to unleash his full strength without accidentally destroying allies alongside the demon. Soldiers streamed away from the egg in organized waves, sweeping through nearby buildings to grab cowering civilians, carrying the wounded, setting up range positions on distant rooftops and towers. Claude looked at him one last time, nodded, then leaned on Bound, and walked away. Only Oleg, scattered rubble, and the throbbing blood egg remained after the army completed its evacuation. A claw here, a horn there, something pressing against the membrane from inside, desperate to get out. Oleg stomped the ground hard enough to crack it, swung his sword behind him in a two-handed grip, and waited. This wasn't even a regular high-level demon, and from inside rose the biggest, most terrifying thing Oleg had ever seen in either of his lives. Dark crimson skin covered in glowing lava vein patterns. This thing wasn't just bigger than the goat demon. The goat demon had been almost as tall as a house. Bigger, casting a shadow over an entire city block. The shockwave flattened every remaining ruin in a 100-meter radius. The sky changed color, daylight dimming, clouds turning blood red, as if reality itself was protesting this thing's existence. From far away, Oleg could feel Claude's army watching. Oleg must have looked like an ant standing in front of a volcano. Claude and Bound stared from their position, tense as bowstrings, and somewhere in the castle keep, Fanny was watching through magically enhanced vision. She could see the siege crews preparing their weapons at maximum range, and beyond them, far in the distance, one tiny armored figure standing alone before a monster that blocked out the sky. She closed her eyes, whispered a prayer, then snapped them open, remembered something, and sprinted back into the keep. The demon wanted to know what Oleg was. Its massive form blurred way too fast for something that big. Claws tearing through the air toward him, each finger longer than Oleg was tall. Oleg shifted his blade by a fraction of a degree. When the claws reached him, his sword was already in motion. His sword met his claws, and the sound that came out was like God slamming a door. The demon's left arm was bent backward at an angle that made his stomach flip. His armor? Not a scratch, not a dent, not even a smudge. His boots had carved 2 trenches in the ground from the impact. The cheer hit him like a physical wall of sound. Our hero has broken the demon's claws. He swung the flag so hard it whistled. Dozens of burning rocks and steel-tipped bolts screamed across the sky and hammered into the demon like a meteor shower. The giant stones made it stumble backward, and a few armor-piercing bolts sank deep into its red skin. So this is the prophesied nemesis. Its voice rumbled like an earthquake, having a bad day. Its arm straightened itself out, bones snapping back into place like they were spring-loaded. Kalonzos mocked Oleg as unworthy of the ancient prophecy and promised to cast the last Herman into the eternal abyss. "Remember the name that shall cast you into the eternal abyss," it declared. Spreading its massive arms like it was introducing itself at a dinner party, every collision sent cracks racing 30 feet through the earth. Kalonzos moved impossibly fast for something larger than a building. His bone axe moved in patterns Oleg could barely track. Vertical cleaves targeted Oleg from skull to pelvis, while deceptive low sweeps attempted to remove his legs. The guy had actual combat technique, not just brute force. But here's the thing, he never landed a single hit. Oleg was retreating though, step by step, giving ground with each exchange. Kalonzos possessed monstrous regeneration, but his raw offensive power remained lower than attacks Oleg had already survived. The true question was no longer whether Oleg could survive, but whether physical force alone could permanently kill the demon. Claude's fighting style had taught him that rushing in like a bulldozer wasn't always optimal. Sometimes you learn more by watching, and partly because something he'd said caught his attention. He recognized the Herman bloodline. The crest on his armor meant something to demons on a fundamental level. Does the last Herman hide inside his iron shell? His hooves cratered the ground on landing, and his axe burst into purple flames so intense the surrounding rubble melted into glowing red puddles. Even Claude, watching from hundreds of meters away, had to shield his face behind his arm. And that was just the residual energy, the leftovers, the splash zone. From their distant vantage point, the soldiers watched him getting pushed back step after step by a flaming demon 3 times his height. Though those 2 old foxes noticed what nobody else did. Through the entire exchange, Oleg hadn't taken a single clean hit. Every attack was blocked or deflected. The demon looked dominant, but it wasn't actually winning. Literally bent the air, and his massive body flickered behind him. The axe came down on his back, wrapped in enough purple hellfire to melt a castle. The explosion turned night into day for a split second, then plunged everything into darkness. The explosion knocked soldiers from their feet across half the city and left a crater where Oleg had been standing. A massive crater replaced Oleg's position, descending so deeply that its smoking bottom disappeared beneath the earth. A soldier collapsed to his knees. Another one dropped his weapon like it weighed 1,000 lb. The clatter of abandoned steel spread through the ranks like a disease. Kalonzos turned away from the crater and faced the army. His grin was obscene, a canyon of teeth splitting his massive face. One guy, Oleg later learned his name was Orvi, threw his spear on the ground and sat there shaking, completely hollow. Claude walked over to him, knelt down, after that battle where everyone else died. And you kept fighting with broken armor and a snapped blade, biting chunks out of the enemy because you had nothing left to swing. Anderson honored your spirit by giving you his own weapon. Orvi picked up the spear with shaking hands. Claude reminded his soldiers that their ancestors had faced monster hordes using wooden clubs when victory had seemed equally impossible. He raised his halberd and pointed it at Kalonzos' distant silhouette. As long as one person from Malaga holds a weapon, this is human territory. All the bravery in the world wouldn't scratch that regenerating red skin. He looked one last time at the castle keep, where a light still burned in Fanny's window. He dropped his visor, locked eyes with bound through the slit. They were going to charge a demon they couldn't hurt, and die fighting because that's what warriors do. Kalonzos sneered at the approaching army like a cat watching ants march toward it. A deep resonant hum from behind him. From the crater from the impossible hole, his ultimate attack had carved into the earth. A spinning object erupted from the crater, trailing a cone of compressed air. His giant sword hurled with so much force, It arrived faster than sound. His axe was batted aside like a toy. The sword kept going and slammed into his chest. The demon's enormous body launched backward like it had been hit by a freight train. Colonzo's carved a trench through the city block before finally stopping beneath rubble 200 meters away. His sword buried itself in the ground at the crater's edge. Colonzo's vomited purple blood while his chest regenerated, staring toward the crater with an emotion Oleg had never seen from a demon. Completely unharmed, armor perfect, not a burn mark, not a scrape, nothing. Oleg interrupted the tyrant's disbelief and admitted the strike was powerful. Although climbing from the crater had been more annoying, you blasted him into a hole so deep it took him forever to climb back out. While climbing, Oleg had heard Colonzo's boasting about ants, pigs, and the coming demon invasion. Oleg pulled his sword from the ground, rested it on his shoulder. So, let him correct you on something. The ground cracked under his boot. You should be the ones trembling. While Oleg escaped the crater, Claude's soldiers had already gathered for a final charge they believed would end in death. Claude and his soldiers had watched him disappear into a pillar of hellfire. Claude slammed his shield into the ground. 20 heavy armored soldiers formed up behind him. The young ones in front were swallowing so hard you could hear their throats clicking. They were ready to charge a demon they couldn't hurt, because that's what Malaga warriors do. Colonzo's face twisted in confusion a split second before his chest imploded, caved in like someone had punched a bowling ball through a watermelon. His red-scaled skin shattered outward in a radial pattern like a windshield hit by a cannonball. His spinning giant sword had crossed the entire battlefield and hit him dead center with the force of a small meteor. The soldiers watched the enormous demon launch backward like a ragdoll after believing the same creature had already killed Oleg. Oleg calmly pulled himself over the crater's edge, stood upright, and brushed the dust from his untouched armor. The most powerful attack a high-level demon could produce delivered point blank. And his response was? That was a long climb. Claude slammed his palm against his own chest plate so hard the sound echoed across the battlefield, louder than collapsing buildings. His voice cracked as he pointed at him with a trembling finger. This grizzled, battle-hardened old warrior was literally shaking with emotion. Clang, like he needed to physically beat the disbelief out of his own body. They saw him just standing there, casually shaking dirt off his shoulders, like Oleg tripped in a garden instead of surviving a demonic nuke. For Malaga, the war cries hit like a tsunami. The dark, overcast sky that Colonzo's presence had summoned actually started breaking up from the volume of human defiance being screamed at it. Far behind the battle lines, civilians who'd been evacuating stopped in their tracks. A woman clutching her daughter tightened her grip, hearing the distant thunder of metal and voices. Are the soldiers singing? The mother stood on tiptoe, peering toward the city walls where flags still flew. A tear cut a clean line through the soot on her cheek. The sun, and right on cue, because apparently the universe has a flair for dramatic timing. It started thin as thread, then widened, then exploded into a full sunrise that washed the entire ruined battlefield in warm golden light. In that light, with his sword in hand and demon blood evaporating off the blade, Oleg apparently looked like some kind of divine warrior descended from the heavens. Now, here's the part that almost made him lose his composure in the middle of the most epic moment of his life. Colonzo's, this terrifying building-sized dimension, hopping high-level demon from the literal pits of hell, was scared of him. The same emotion he'd inflicted on thousands of victims was now eating him alive, and he had absolutely no idea how to handle it. Each deliberate step created a small earthquake as Oleg approached like the predator and forced Colonzo's into the role of cornered prey. He scrambled backward on all fours, claws gouging the stone. Eyes wild with panic, he stopped crawling, stood up, and just like that, embarrassment replaced terror, which immediately got replaced by rage. After experiencing cowardice for the first time, Colonzo's buried his shame beneath rage and challenged Oleg again. You even made him feel what those weaklings feel. Then his voice cranked up to 11. Even if you can't defeat him, what can you do? Two things happened in his brain simultaneously. First, Oleg could fight you all day. Was this demon secretly a gamer? Second, Oleg could do this all day. Oleg almost broke character, almost cracked a smile right there in the middle of his dramatic stare down. His jaw physically hurt from clinching to keep the laugh in. He uses an axe, And he's not even as handsome as the real one. Oleg was just standing there, clearly thinking about something else entirely, treating his immortality declaration like background noise. The instant he got close, Oleg lifted his leg and kicked him in the torso. His massive body folded around his boot like a lawn chair. The 3-meter demon folded around Oleg's kick and flew through the air with none of its earlier dignity. The giant sword passed through his midsection with almost no resistance, like cutting warm butter with a hot knife. Purple blood sprayed in a beautiful arc that caught the morning sunlight and honestly looked kind of pretty in a horrifying way. For about 2 seconds, Oleg thought that might be it. Thousands of them, tiny writhing red tendrils stretching between his upper and lower body like living stitches. Kalonzos had just explained his immortality, yet Oleg still cut him in half to test exactly how the regeneration functioned. Those disgusting blood threads knitting everything back together. Within a minute, he'd be fighting at full strength. Every devastating blow would be undone by regeneration in under a minute. Oleg could keep chopping him into pieces until the sun went down, came back up, and went down again. And he'd just keep reassembling like the world's most aggressive jigsaw puzzle. His armor could tank everything he threw at him, standing there in the morning light, watching a bisected demon stitch himself back together, while an army of traumatized soldiers cheered his name. Oleg had exactly one coherent thought. Oleg really should have read more of those magic books in the library. Kalonzos was screaming at him like a kid who just learned a new word and won't stop using it. Very impressive vocabulary for a giant red idiot. His trash talk had become background noise, like a broken radio playing the same annoying song on loop. Oleg had already learned everything he needed from the fight, including the limits of brute force against immortal flesh. Oleg wanted to see exactly how his regeneration worked, how fast it kicked in, and whether pure physical damage could ever overwhelm it. He had been searching for another solution since watching Claude and Bound channel energy through their bodies and weapons. He'd pull magical energy from inside his body and coat himself in it, turning into a crimson comet, and Bound channel magic through his staff, concentrating the power of multiple mages into devastating attacks. Oleg had studied every movement, every magical current, and every technique used to guide internal power into an external attack. He had never cast magic before, but his enormous wisdom allowed him to understand patterns that normally required decades of training. Oleg raised his giant sword over his head and did something incredibly stupid. Oleg reached inside himself, found the magic that had apparently been sitting there this whole time doing nothing, grabbed it, and yanked. Raw, violent, the magical equivalent of solving a Rubik's Cube by smashing it with a hammer. The magic poured into his sword and kept pouring and kept pouring. The blade started glowing white, not faintly, not subtly, blinding white, like Oleg was holding a piece of the sun. The air itself warped and twisted near the blade as the concentration of magical energy exceeded what the local reality was designed to handle. For the second time tonight, a high-level demon was reduced to stuttering incoherence by looking at him. Not strength, not speed, but the ability to make ancient evil beings forget how sentences work. Meanwhile, far behind him, Bound was having a professional crisis. Bound gripped his staff until his fingers whitened, watching Oleg violate every accepted rule of magical extraction. Oleg tried to process it through the lens of someone who'd spent his entire life studying magical theory. He's channeling his internal magic into the sword. When Bound guided magic through his staff, Oleg was watching. When Claude ignited his body enhancement, Oleg was watching. When the cultist mages cast their spells, Oleg was watching, learning, absorbing, filing it all away during combat. That's not how magic works. When Bound realized Oleg was squeezing raw magic from his body through sheer force, the old mage's worldview collapsed. And thank the gods Fanny wasn't raised to be a spoiled brat. High Claude had apparently calmed down enough to eavesdrop. What's that about Fanny having a bad temper? Normally, this would shred a person's magical circuits, kill them instantly, or at minimum damn them for life. He stared at him with the expression of a physics professor watching someone casually violate the laws of thermodynamics. Decades of research. Decades. And this kid just brute forces magic out of his body like squeezing a toothpaste, and it works. Claude immediately considered the practical consequences and quietly wondered whether Oleg's impossible gifts could pass to future children. Bound recognized the matchmaking idea immediately. While Claude's expression confirmed he was considering exactly that possibility, Claude looked down at his own arms, thinner than they used to be. Claude admitted his aging body might fail before Fanny became strong enough to survive the continent's cruelty alone. And Oleg is honest, powerful, young, brave, saved his daughter's life, saved the entire city multiple times, and doesn't have any of the usual noble arrogance. Were these two old men matchmaking him with Fanny right now, in the middle of a demon battle, while Oleg was literally charging up a magic nuke? But seriously, Claude was out here planning his daughter's wedding, while a high-level demon was trying to destroy his city. The man had his priorities sorted in the most chaotic order possible. That girl has hated people making decisions for her since she was 5. Remembering someone, maybe a student, a friend, someone long gone. If his body were still what it was 20 years ago, if Fanny were already strong enough to stand on her own, what father wants to hand his daughter to someone else? But reality doesn't care about what fathers want. He clapped Bound on the shoulder, hard enough to rattle the old man's teeth. Claude claimed Fanny's gratitude had already become something deeper, because her face brightened whenever anyone mentioned Oleg. Bound, catching a stray bullet he didn't ask for. He stared toward the castle keep sunset, stretching his shadow into something long and thin and tired. Every dent and scratch on his armor caught the light. That's exactly why Oleg needed to find someone worthy, while Oleg could still swing a sword before it's too late. But back to him and the giant glowing sword. His blade was now completely wrapped in solid white magic, a sword-shaped piece of pure, concentrated magical energy, so dense that the space around it was visibly bending. The concentrated sword radiated enough power to distort nearby space and punish any ordinary witness who stared directly at it. Then Oleg imagined the beam going through Colonzo's, through the buildings behind him, through the city walls, through the farmland beyond, and possibly carving a canyon. Across the continent, yeah. No, the goal is to save Malaga, not accidentally delete it from the map. As for Colonzo's, the great blood-marrow tyrant, the immortal terror of the abyss, the demon who 5 minutes ago was giving speeches about eternal darkness and the coming of his species. Except the summoning ritual was a one-way ticket. It could bring demons into the world, but couldn't send them back. The magical equivalent of a flight with no return booking. Colonzo's fled while Oleg followed with a blade carrying concentrated magical power and every reason the demon had ever feared humanity. Why did Oleg push to the front of the line when they were picking who got summoned? And he wasn't even good at it. The idiot was so massive he couldn't fit inside buildings. His own terrifying body, the thing that was supposed to make mortals wet themselves in fear, was now his biggest problem. Too big to hide, too big to squeeze through alleys, too big to do anything except keep running in a straight line, while Oleg walked behind him holding a sword made of condensed death. And Oleg could tell from the way he kept glancing back that he could feel him, that prickling at the back of his neck, that instinct screaming, "The thing behind you is going to kill you, and there is nothing in any dimension that will stop it." Oleg shifted his grip, right hand normal, left hand reversed, pulled the sword back to his hip in a drawing stance. Walls crumbling, debris flying, dust tornadoes spiraling in his wake. He couldn't break. 3M tall demon running full speed, and suddenly there's a wall of armored human in his path. His own momentum slammed him straight into him, specifically into the pommel of his sword, which Oleg positioned right at chest height. His body crumpled around the impact point and then launched skyward from the force, shrieking through the air, friction making him whistle like a kettle. Oleg knew the technique sounded like impossible anime nonsense, even though he was the one performing it. Oleg swung the sword upward in a drawing/motion from hip to sky in one continuous arc. The blade left an afterimage so persistent, it hung in the air like a scar in reality. All the magic Oleg had brutally forced from his body erupted from the blade in a single upward arc. The released beam warped light like a massive heat mirage and tore a glowing path directly through the sky. Buildings nearby that had somehow survived everything else tonight finally gave up and fell over. Colonzo's was flailing in midair like a cat thrown into a swimming pool. He saw it coming, tried to dodge by swimming through the air with his limbs, which, for the record, does not work outside of cartoons. The white light hit him dead center and split him vertically from crown to crotch, perfectly down the middle. Two symmetrical halves of demon separated in midair with surgical precision. The beam kept going past him up through the clouds, tearing a visible gash in the overcast sky. Letting blue heaven peek through the wound, his organs attempted to wriggle back into place. But the white magical flames burned every regenerating thread before reconnection. The magic Oleg had infused into the strike clung to both wounds and transformed regeneration into continuous incineration. And every time a blood thread tried to reach across and reconnect the two halves, sizzle, it evaporated on contact, like touching a hot stove. His healing factor was fighting his magic in real time, and his magic was winning. Turns out when you shove enough raw magic into a wound, nothing can grow back. Something speaking to him from wherever demons go when they're not ruining everyone's day. Then, simultaneously, both halves of his face turned to look down at him and smiled. Not a fierce smile, not a rage smile, a calm, knowing, deeply unsettling smile, perfectly symmetrical across his split face, like his two halves had rehearsed it. The split demon smiled with terrifying calm before beginning the same self-immolation Oleg had witnessed from every dying hellspawn. The massive body crumbled inward, layer by layer, burning from the inside out. Two burning orbs of hatred, reflecting his armored silhouette in their pupils, staring at him with a promise that transcended death. No demon roars, no explosions, no screaming, just wind and the distant sound of a city holding its breath. Far away, Oleg could see Claude and Bound standing together, two old warriors covered in blood and dust, tears cutting tracks through the grime on their faces. The soldiers were frozen, covered in soot, lips cracked, eyes bloodshot, staring at the empty sky where a demon used to be. The questions came in hoarse whispers, fragile, like speaking too loudly might undo reality and bring the horror back. Oleg turned to face them, lifted his giant sword one-handed over his head. The last traces of magic energy crackled off the blade in tiny sparks of light that floated upward like fireflies. Not a spell, just raw amplification, because apparently Oleg could do that now. Soldiers tackled each other to the ground in bear hugs. Grown men dropped to their knees and wailed, not from fear, but from the overwhelming relief of being alive when they'd already accepted death. A freckle-faced young soldier punched the ground over and over, sobbing. Mages ripped off their pointed hats, threw their precious staffs on the ground, and started dancing. A blue light rocketed into the sky and exploded into the shape of Malaga's lion crest. Across the city, garrison soldiers who'd been white-knuckling their posts finally collapsed. Some slid down walls, some cried. Some just sat there staring at the lion in the sky, unable to form words. But when the word victory rippled through the crowd, the entire street transformed. Claude stood apart from the celebration, thumb running along the handle of a small dagger at his belt. It had fallen from the guard captain's body during the transformation, right before the teleportation spell pulled Claude away. For a moment, Claude saw something or someone in the reflection. A young man with a chipped iron sword, standing in a slum doorway swearing to protect his lord's back forever. Bound's calloused hand landed on Claude's shoulder plate. He hadn't seen Claude cry since his wife died 20 years ago. Bound had cast something, a preservation spell, capturing the moment, freezing it in magical amber forever. Claude frantically wiped his face, turning brick red. Then he looked toward him. Standing in the ruins, sword raised, soldiers celebrating around his feet, and smiled. Our city is alive, and that ridiculous, overpowered, socially awkward young man with no combat training who learned magic by watching us fight for 30 seconds? The warriors understood Oleg had killed a high-level demon by inventing an attack that violated established magical theory. And somewhere in the castle keep, a silver-haired girl with ocean blue eyes was probably smiling. Too, all Oleg knew was that the demon was dead. His sword arm was tired for the first time in months. And somewhere in this city, there was leftover honey-glazed roast pork with his name on it. Oleg had just announced victory with magically amplified force when a stronger wave of malice froze his spine. The clear sky, the beautiful sunrise-filled sky that had perfectly timed its dramatic appearance for his victory moment, was getting eaten alive by storm clouds. The entire ceiling of the world turned into one massive ritual circle, spinning slowly, pulsing with power that made Colonzo's feel like a warm-up act. Swords came out, shields went up. A soldier near him swallowed so hard Oleg could hear his throat click from 10 meters away. But when they looked up and saw the Skysix circle stretching over the entire city like a predator's wing. There was nowhere to run. Every street, every building, every person, all inside the circle shadow. The old mage was sweating bullets, his staff flickering with unstable light like a dying flashlight. Bound could not interpret the enormous circle, but instinct warned him that nothing beneath it remained safe. Whatever was behind that circle was operating on a level beyond anything Bound's magic could comprehend. If something bigger than Colonzo's came through that circle, the circle just hung there spinning, glowing, mocking us. Soldiers stood in combat stances so long their muscles started cramping, but nobody dared relax. Sweat beaded in armor joints and caught the blood-red light from above, making everyone look like they were bleeding from their seams. The clouds churned until every survivor felt trapped beneath a crimson ocean with something vast and hungry staring downward. The voice praised the last Herman's unexpected strength, while its pressure cracked mortar and drove weaker civilians to their knees. Several civilians collapsed, dry heaving from the sheer pressure of the voice existing near them. Those last words sharpened into a piercing whine that made people's ears bleed. Oleg could feel Claude behind him, rigid as a statue, ice running up his spine. Bound's robe was soaked through with cold sweat. Instead, Oleg started pulling magic from his body again. That brutal squeeze-the-sponge technique that apparently violated every law of magical theory and channeled it into his sword. Its tone shifted to something almost playful, like a cat batting at a mouse. The question is, can you protect this city? 1,000 tiny eyes opened in the blood-red clouds. Oleg swung his sword upward and unleashed every reserve he had gathered against the enormous ritual circle. A beam of white energy, a full-power magic cannon, rocketed from his blade toward the circle like a laser cutting through hell's ceiling. White light exploded across the sky, so bright that every single person in the city was forced to shut their eyes. The entire world vibrated when the light faded and people opened their eyes, desperate to see the circle destroyed. It was still there, completely untouched, spinning calmly, looking exactly the same as before. Except now it seemed to be laughing at us. His attack, the same attack that had split a high-level demon in half and carved a hole in the clouds, had done nothing to the circle. Whatever was on the other side of that portal wasn't just stronger than Colonzo's. So, his attack did hurt something. Even if it didn't break the circle, the scream of pain, disguised as anger, told him everything. This thing was nearly the size of the entire city, so massive it blocked out what little sky remained visible. The air around it didn't just get hot. The atmosphere itself was combusting from proximity. A fireball the size of a city was falling on a city. The math was simple, and the math was death. Claude looked at the fireball with the expression of a man who's done arguing with the universe. "This is not ideal," he said, which might be the greatest understatement in the history of understatements. Bound's staff was shaking so violently it had started cracking. The old mage was trying to calculate if he could shield the city. Blood leaked from Bound's mouth as he calculated the barrier requirement and admitted he could not stop the falling fire. Oleg fired another magic cannon at the fireball. Oleg could see its slow halt start to retreat upward. Then, laughter. The fireball exploded. Not into nothing, into 1,000 smaller fireballs. An entire sky's worth of burning death, spreading out to cover every square meter of the city. Oleg swung his sword like a madman, firing magic blasts in every direction, shattering dozens, hundreds of the falling flames. Except this time, it wasn't a village of strangers. It was an entire city of people who'd cheered his name 5 minutes ago. A little girl who'd pointed at the sunrise and said, "Look, Mama, the sun." Soldiers turned to face him one last time. The soldiers knew Oleg had given everything. Yet even the strongest man on the continent could not stop the entire burning sky. A crimson streak launched from the top of the castle keep. A single bolt of red light, like a shooting star fired from a cannon, arcing across the blood-red sky. It hit the zenith directly above the city and bloomed. A translucent red barrier, a dome of protective energy, expanded outward in every direction at impossible speed. It covered the entire city in less than a second. The fire rain hit the barrier and stopped. Everyone, soldiers, civilians, Claude, Bound, the demon in the sky, and him, stared in stunned silence. Then the circle began shrinking, folding in on itself, retreating back to whatever hell it came from. During its retreat, Everyone heard the ancient demon cursing Malaga and promising revenge from beyond the closing circle. A tantrum from something ancient and terrible that had just been dam blocked by a force field. They'd been burned figuratively too many times tonight. They watched the empty sky for nearly an hour, afraid that celebrating too early might summon another impossible horror. Thousands of people standing in the streets holding their breath. The first cheer was barely a whisper. Then the entire city detonated with emotions so raw and chaotic it made every previous celebration look like a polite golf clap. And it was beautiful, Claude, Bound said softly, looking at the red barrier still shimmering overhead. Claude grinned with exhausted pride, displaying the first completely genuine smile Oleg had ever seen from the city lord. Fanny installed it into the city's shield core. If he'd kept the giant fireball together, the barrier might not have held. But he split it into weak scattered rain, and the shield can block weak attacks all day. She'd remembered the one thing everyone else had forgotten, the dragon crystal. She'd risked her life to retrieve the whole reason for her original journey. She'd installed it into the city's ancient defense system at the exact perfect moment. The whole quest, the entire chain of events, him saving her in the forest, escorting her to the city, her retrieving the crystal. Everything. One girl, one crystal, one barrier, one city saved. For the first time since arriving in this world, Oleg stood genuinely and completely exhausted after spending every reserve of magic. The quest panel confirmed the demon conspiracy in Malaga was defeated, ending the longest and most brutal night of his second life. Cultists, lesser demons, summoned tyrants, and the entity beyond the sky circle had all failed to destroy the city. Oleg finally lowered his sword while soldiers secured the streets, healers treated the wounded, and civilians emerged from their shelters. The people understood that Oleg had not fought for reputation or payment, but because another massacre could not be allowed. Fanny returned from the shield corps exhausted but smiling, relieved to see her father and Oleg both alive. With Malaga safe at last, the armored warrior allowed himself to think about food, a hot bath, and several days of sleep. The dragon crystal shield held, the fire rain vanished, and the wounded city finally understood that the nightmare was over. Claude's soldiers lowered their weapons only after the normal blue sky remained untouched for nearly an hour. Fanny had protected every street from the castle core, proving that saving her earlier had changed Malaga's entire fate. Oleg accepted the people's gratitude, although being called a hero embarrassed him more than fighting a high-level demon. The quest confirmed that the conspiracy had been destroyed and rewarded him with several precious free attribute points. He invested them into stamina, restoring the strength and magical reserves that the endless battles had nearly emptied. Within moments, the exhaustion disappeared, leaving his body tougher and his internal power deeper than ever before. Claude promised engineers, carpenters, and craftsmen to restore Glenom Castle once Malaga completed its emergency recovery. Bound still could not understand how Oleg had learned magic by watching others and forcing raw energy through his sword. Fanny simply smiled because the strange armored warrior had saved her, her father, and every innocent person in the city. Oleg had arrived in this world unable to lift his own weapon or complete more than a few push-ups. Now his fists could break castle walls, his speed could outrun sound, and his blade could permanently destroy immortal demons. He still lacked refinement, social skills, servants, and any reasonable understanding of how powerful he had become. But he possessed the discipline to train without stopping, and the resolve to protect anyone standing within his reach. The man reborn with every stat at 1 now stood as the unbreakable guardian of an entire city.